Don't stand in the way of this or you might get railroaded. Literally. Welcome, my Mere Modelites, to another round of the Mere Models book reviews. My name is Kyron, host of the Mere Models podcast, but also this one where I dive deeper into the books that we are reading to get some learnings that we can take away from them, to examine some themes and perhaps understand some things that can be applied to our own everyday lives. And indeed, there are a couple of things from this book. We have How Innovation Works by Matt Ridley. So this was published in 2020 and it's about 400 pages in length. Took me probably about 9 hours to get through. And it's a how-to book that somewhat becomes an argument for change. Matt is definitely a fan of innovation. So he uses primarily stories from history to illustrate key points. So he'll talk really about, people like Thomas Edison and the invention of the light bulb and all sorts of inventors and innovators over the years. The book is split up into 12 chapters in total, and the first 7 are really about types of innovation. So we have energy, public health, transport, food, low technology innovation, communication and computing, and prehistoric innovation. The second 5 are pretty much more on, I suppose, characteristics of it and kind of maybe defining it a little bit more, or an examination of the process. So these are things like innovation's essentials, the economics of innovation, fakes, frauds, fads, and failures, resistance to innovation, and an innovation famine with an afterword chucked in there as well. So I suppose a lot of the book is really him distinguishing between innovation, invention, and individuals who are part of the process of this. And I guess that would be my kind of synopsis of the book here. Now, who is Matt Ridley and why did he write this? Well, he's a science writer, he's a journalist. I've actually read a couple of his books before called The Red Queen and The Origins of Virtue, although I haven't reviewed them on this channel. I'd previously read those maybe, like 5 or 10 years ago. The book itself is, I suppose, following what his interests are. So this is where I would just maybe caution, even in this section, that you can kind of see a creeping in of his personal values and opinions and him applying it to this topic that he has obviously researched very deeply. So let's get into the first theme, and I've labeled this the what, clearing up innovations ises and isn'ts. So what is it and what isn't it? There's no real clear one-liner that I would take away from this book. He kind of hints at it right at the start, but it's something along the lines of it's enhanced forms of improbability. So basically it's a reducing of entropy. So this is, disorder, chaos in the world, and conglomerating atoms into more useful arrangements that benefit humanity in some way, make things better. And it's really this utility, this usefulness, which is important because you can create order from disorder, but it doesn't necessarily help people. It's maybe not innovative. It's maybe a replication of something that's already been done, or maybe it's a piece of art that is maybe a bit more subjective, but maybe you wouldn't say it's innovative. So I'm going to jump here to chapter 8 and the subtitles, because I really think that kind of talks in general, I guess, what innovation is, and we can get a bit of an understanding from this. So here, the subtitles here are: innovation is gradual, innovation is different from invention, innovation is often serendipitous, innovation is recombinant, innovation involves trial and error, innovation is a team sport, innovation is inexorable, innovation's hype cycle, innovation prefers fragmented governance, and innovation increasingly means using fewer resources rather than more. So we can really see that, I suppose, over time, and he really highlights this with so many different historical examples where we see, okay, innovation isn't necessarily a thing that it just pops up. Usually it does take a long time. It's not like we went straight from inventing in flight to then being able to go up into space. No, there was a huge decades long process of how you can see it gradually moves closer and closer to us being able to fly higher distances, get up into places where humans can't survive on their own, etc., etc. So there's so many different ways where we can look at this, and I'd say it's kind of the underlying mindset or process that makes new things. And so I'll also jump onto page 89 here, and it talks about the 3 stages. And this is, I guess, where we could say, oh, okay, this is why innovation is somewhat more of a process rather than an invention. And so if I jump into here and I say, okay, the story of the internal combustion engine displays the usual features of an innovation: a long and deep history characterized by failure, a shorter period marked by an improvement in affordability characterized by simultaneous patenting and rivalries, and a subsequent story of evolutionary improvement by trial and error. So this trial and error is a critical portion of it. And an innovation isn't usually out of the box, a sudden idea of, oh, wow, I could create light by testing my technology of the light bulb here, but using a current through a wire and then using this current to create heat in some sort of filament, which then produces light and heat. And then kind of completing the circuit, and then hence we have the light bulb. And there's where we get into people like Thomas Edison, who famously talks about how he it's 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration, or how he tested out 5,000 different filaments until he found this bamboo that actually was the perfect material that he needed to be able to mass produce. So it really is talking about how, okay, no, it's not one person, it's not one thing, it's not one idea, it's this really tiny work hard, perspiring, trial and error, failing so much until you finally get this one thing, but this thing doesn't really make the innovation because now you need to create the bulb to fit around this light bulb and all this sort of things, all combining into this process. So it's not a thing, it's not a one individual thing, and you point out and go, that's innovation. It's this kind of collective humanity working together, this process. So some examples of this where you'd be saying, okay, innovation is more like GMOs, so genetically modified organisms, I believe it is. And it's not golden rice or this one particular variety or strain of wheat. It's telephony, so the ability to communicate over long distances where my normal voice wouldn't be able to reach 100 meters away. And it's not the iPhone, even though that was a innovative device. It wasn't the big innovation, I guess you'd call. And there is a blending of these things, so it does get into semantics somewhat. It's more the process of vaccination. I am immunizing yourself and having the body react to a smaller, non-lethal dose of whatever it be, whether it be chickenpox or coronavirus or something. And it's not a particular technology, mRNAs, and it's not a particular substance or a brand such as, I don't know, Pfizer, whatever. So that's kind of the what portion. It's really, you got to get into your head that it's not a human thing. That's probably not the best way to look at it. It's more a accumulation of many humans working on things together. And there is quite a strong emphasis on how all of these things and innovation in technology, in light bulbs and whatnot and things like that, multiple people tend to discover it across the world simultaneously. And that somewhat says it's not particularly the great man theory of history. It's more like this inexorable process of humanity working forwards and pressing forwards. So we'll get on to the second theme now, which is the how. And I've kind of subtitled this, Move Aside and GTFO, get the fuck out. So get the fuck out of the way. And the reason I say this is because it's somewhat defined by the negative. So the last 4 chapters in particular really showcase how it's more innovation gets stymied and it gets stopped and it gets blocked and it can't move forward as fast and progressively as it should, but it's more like this kind of battle between a collective entity, which is usually the government or regulations or a conglomeration of unions or things like that, versus this other thing called innovation, which is trying to break the boundaries and improve and make things better. So I'm going to jump here to page 327 on the middle of it, where it talks about a couple of things, the characteristic features of opposition to innovation as well. So to quote, "Here we see all the characteristic features of opposition to innovation: an appeal to safety, a degree of self-interest among vested interest, and a paranoia among the powerful. Recent debates about genetically modified food or social media echo these old coffee wars." And so he's really highlighting in how the 1790s and the 1800s, that coffee, the coffee beans being found in the New World. So this is kind of like, I think like the Peru, Chilean region, something like that. Actually, maybe even came from Africa. Was how, they were scared. People were scared. Kings were scared. Oh, coffee! It's getting people together in these kind of cafe houses, and it's a stimulant. So they're like going to be all jacked up, and they're going to talk about revolution and bad ideas and things like this. And it's like, yeah, okay, well maybe it's a good thing those things are happening. Yet it seems to be a power of some sort saying, no, we don't want the coffee here. Or it's people like the alcohol industry lobbying to get bans put on it because of safety concerns and things like this. So very rarely do these concerns and these reasons for stopping innovation, very rarely are they justified. In the whole of the book, he gives a couple of examples, and I really want to highlight, there's probably 80 different examples he gives of different types of inventors and innovations throughout history. There's really only a couple of cases. One comes to mind is thalidomide, I believe that's how you say it, which was a drug introduced particularly into the US, where it, I think it like breached this membrane that people didn't think it would be able to get through, and ended up affecting fetuses inside pregnant women. And I believe either causing the death of the fetus, even though I guess it's not technically alive, causing the termination of it, or having very severe side effects or something like this. So this is where you could maybe say, oh, innovation's so bad, and it's going to take all the jobs, or the innovation of this is it's going to completely change humanity, and we're going to all become, dystopian, blah, 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 blah. Very rarely, very, very rarely. And this is where it's not a scientific book per se, in the sense it's not looking at studies, and it's not, there's no real graphs or hard data that particularly backs up a lot of what he talks about. But this is where you look at the history and go, okay, where was an innovative thing that happened, really, really a bad thing that happened to humanity? You could maybe say weapons is really the only argument I think can be made for that. But even then, it's like the innovation in weapons helped spur other industries to make things better as well. So it seems to be, it's more like a mindset of fighting change is the root cause of this. If you're really opposed to innovation, it seems to be you're opposed to change. And then the reason for that is because you've worked yourself into a position of power, or you've done these other things to then make this mindset go, oh, I don't want change. Change is bad. Innovation's bad. So here's some rules of thumb, I guess, I've taken from this section. So this is somewhat the how, plus if you're an individual looking to know, oh, where's innovation coming through nowadays? What are some ways that it could be blocked, or how I could make things better? These are a couple of the rules of thumbs I've taken from the book. So some things to avoid and attract so you don't get blindsided is what I've written down. So number one, look for rent seekers and investigate the opposite. So usually if people are rent seeking, so this is they're on top of an industry where they already hold all the patents or whatnot, and they are just looking to extract a residual steady income without extra effort on their own. Whatever they say, whatever they think, the innovation is usually on the opposite side of that. So if they're worried about something, that's usually where the innovation is occurring. The second, fear of safety is the main tell of a person on the wrong side of innovation. If they are scared and they are using fear to really highlight, oh, this is super bad, we need to be worried, usually they're on the wrong side of innovation. And now I can understand how this can get mixed up with things like a particular thing to be fearful of. There's plenty of things to be fearful of. When COVID was first happening, there was plenty of people sounding the warning alarms, and they had a good right to. There was turned out to be a global pandemic. So, and it could have been much, much worse. Could have killed young children, for example, instead of the elderly. So there is, not to get mixed up, don't think everything, if someone's fearful of something, it means they're on the wrong side of innovation. Got to use a little bit of common sense. But if they're fearful of, humans are going to turn into mindless robots because of Twitter or of this, social media, I would argue, you're probably that's not good enough. Yeah, that's not correct. Another one, so dispelling myths. This is related to kind of publicly funded research is not better than private research in terms of creating innovation. Plenty of examples in the book of how they're trying to create flight, for example, and it's the Wright brothers who are this, bicycle repairmen doing their own little fun things on the side outside of their day job versus a guy who got a grant from the government who was the foremost leader, expert of it, and he couldn't break through, and he wasn't the one who invented flight. So it's more like the another one is that lone innovators. It is usually people who are doing things with others, I guess, or at least they're sharing ideas. So it's very rare the individual genius in their cave or in their little blocked off area with no access to outside information. Very rarely are they the ones who innovate, and it's more where trade is happening, where and like literal trade, as in trade of goods and services. That was where the innovation typically happened in the past. So don't think of it as like the one solitary genius. It's usually from collections of individuals, or an individual who gets the collection of other people's ideas coming through. Number 4, innovation is likely to come from small, nimble companies or big ones with branches and an ethos of trial and error. So if you have a big conglomeration, i.e. an entity of some sort, a government, a corporation with a very fixed kind of pyramid structure, you're very, very unlikely to see innovation happening in that, because it tends to stifle it. There tends to be this propensity for organizations like this to not want change. And that's usually because they're big and solidified, and it's hard to have change in them. The number 5, and the second to last one I had, was open source, or at least no ability to rent seek, IP squat, or frivolously sue, is better in the medium to long term and still good in the short term due to a first mover advantage. So this is where many arguments were being proposed, or at least highlighted. But if I'm an innovator and I put all of this hard work in, and then somebody steals my idea, that is actually going to stifle innovation. It's not going to make me or individuals want to try and innovate on things, because they'll just get wrecked. The only case where this seems to sort of make sense is something like a pharmaceutical drug, where you have to put in the tens of billions of hours and work and tens of billions of money to be able to get this new drug. And then if someone could just, you start selling it, and then it's like another company over here it gets the chemical recipe, completely recreates it, and they're better marketers. Well, that doesn't seem fair. But even then, there are some arguments that the reason it costs so much is because of all the regulations related to safety and whatnot, which can be done in a better way. And then the last one here is related to regulations. Broad, unclear regulations work when followed up and enforced by small, on-the-ground interested parties. So regulations this is where it's getting into kind of my own personal thoughts here as well. Regulations seem to do a pretty bad job in general. They don't actually seem to help that much. And usually they're too broad, but are enforced by a large entity. So in this case, we're thinking along the lines of you're not allowed to buy and trade, sell crypto assets on the internet. And we're going to put this broad regulation in, no innovation in this sector. And then people just go, all right, well, I'll just go elsewhere where there are no regulations, but also there's no safeguards at all. So this is where scams and frauds and fads and things like that come into place. Whereas if there was regulation which was either very particular and niche and saying, no, you're not allowed to put thalidomide into these drugs that you're creating because, and then it has a bunch of scientific studies proving it's dangerous to fetuses. That regulation, spot on, well done. But then on the other case, when it's something new and you want a broad scale thing to be able to enforce, I guess, some general principles, that's where you want, okay, it needs to be, the local GP doctor who is now saying, I'm not sure this is good for you in your particular case, Mrs. Kyrina, because you're pregnant and there are some questions as to whether thalidomide actually is good for a baby or not. I'd suggest not, that sort of thing. So yeah, those are, I guess, like the general principles I've kind of taken from this book, and the hows and the definition of what innovation actually is. So let's jump onto some of my own observations and takeaways now that I'm kind of stuck into it. I'm enthusiastic of this book because it somewhat matches my thoughts on Bitcoin as a cryptocurrency and then all the others as crypto assets, because it's just something I'm intrigued in at this very moment in time. And it matches my thoughts, which were basically regulation is generally a bad idea. Generally, the government's coming in and enforcing what I as an individual can or cannot do is silly and leads to worse outcomes for everybody over the large scale, even though arguments can be made on a very small scale for a very individual, yes, that would have been better for that person. So yeah, my thoughts on innovation in general somewhat reflect Matt Ridley's, which is innovation is good and you want more of it in your life rather than less. And you want more of it for humanity rather than less. Very similar to the book Thinking, Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, which I've reviewed on this channel before, if you feel like checking that out. On the aggregate, I would say this book is correct, but probably 10% of it has got to be misrepresented or just plain out wrong. There's so many stories he tells in here, and I really need to emphasize there is probably, I can even just go to the back here and see, yeah, there's so many different names that are chucked in here that my estimate of 80 is probably well under what it actually is, and maybe even up into the hundreds, because there's just so many names of things and inventions and innovations that were created, which he references in the actual book itself. And it's impossible to get all of those right. You'd have to spend a lifetime. If you were to live and die by what you said in this book, you would have to spend a lifetime researching, 5 months on each individual person that he talks about to really be able to say, yeah, I know the details of that and I can represent it in this way. The last one is that this, once again, is a new book published in 2020. And his background is somewhat libertarian. So the book itself, I wouldn't say is hugely data-driven. It's kind of built upon principles and history rather than science and the process. So yeah, to summarize, It captures the spirit of philosophy of innovation, if not the science, the process, and the technological steps of how it works. So I was actually rather surprised by how much emphasis is somewhat placed on the hindrances, what is stopping innovation, rather than what innovation actually is. It almost seems like innovation is already here out in the world, and humans just go about on their day-to-day lives and how we're built and how we program and function. We seem to just seek out innovation, and it's these kind of group think entities which stifle it and stifle individuals from seeking innovation. So the book itself is new, and I'm somewhat skeptical of new books in terms of how they'll hold up in the grand scale of time. Will this be talked about in 80 years? Chances are it won't be. So I wouldn't put too much weight on it, but it did add to, I think, a kind of personal philosophy or a hypothesis that I'm building. So overall, I'm giving the book How Innovation Works by Matt Ridley a 7 out of 10. I thought it was a pretty decent read and helped to clarify a couple of things that I had in my own brain. So that is it for today, my mere mortalites. Thank you for joining me all the way to the end of this video. What are your thoughts on innovation? How do you seek it out in your everyday life? Are you intrigued by it, or are you more scared by it? I would love to know all of these things. Best way to do that is to leave a comment on this video. And I would just recommend that you check out the Mere Mortals podcast. I spend a lot of time on work on that podcast, and many of the ideas and things that I gain from this book, I also talk about there and explore it in a deeper manner. And if you want some more off-the-cuff remarks and other random little things I took from this book, it's worth checking out the end-of-month book recaps, because I go over those in detail and add some of those little extra things. So, oh man, a big review for today, and I'm really thankful for you for tuning in, and I really do hope you enjoyed it. And if not, let me know why and how I can improve, because I'm always looking to innovate these book reviews. So once again, I hope you have a fantastic day wherever you are in the world. Kyron out.